Despite all the federal guidance that masks are key to preventing a new wave of COVID cases and deaths. And it's not just Governor Abbott making this terrible decision. Mississippi Governor Tate Reeves also announced his state would reopen and repeal mask mandates, even though their vaccination rate in Mississippi is barely better than Texas. And what makes this all the more maddening is that at the end of this week, hopefully the Senate could pass the president's $1.9 trillion COVID relief package that will send much-needed aid to states and businesses and people who are unemployed and those making less than $75,000 a year. Basically designed to help everyone ride this out safely to suppress the virus for the 8 to 12 more weeks it could take to get to a much better place. If only we can hang on collectively as a nation. Joined now by Director Inosa, who's the chair of Texas Democrats, and Olivia Troy, a former member of the White House Coronavirus Task Force, who was originally the protocol passed in Texas. And Inosa, let me start with you and ask your reaction to the governor's announcement today.
Insanity. I'd like to say that Governor Abbott has lost his mind by doing this. You know, when we have 90% of the people in the state of Texas that haven't been vaccinated, we're 49th in the country in vaccine distribution. We have some of the highest rates of COVID in the nation and the highest number of deaths among all the states in the country. But what he's doing now is something that has nothing to do with what's right and wrong, but everything to do with politics. I don't know if you know this, but the Republican Executive Committee in the state of Texas condemned him for having a mask mandate. The chairman of the Republican Party in Texas demonstrated in front of the governor's mansion because he did this and because he closed down the businesses and threatened to run against him. What Greg Abbott is doing is putting his own political career over the interest of the people of the state of Texas. He doesn't care about it for the fact that if he does this right before spring break, right before where I am from, thousands of big kids are going to be coming to South Padre Island, gathering in restaurants and bars, shoulder to shoulder, and making themselves vulnerable to this disease that they're going to take home to their parents and their grandparents, and cause a huge spike in this virus in the state of Texas just when we were getting things together to try to defeat it. This is something that I believe shows that Governor Abbott's got to be the worst governor in the state of Texas right after this colossal failure that left the state citizens without power and without water. He then does this. This is just something horrible, and I hope to God that people understand that this governor has to go. He has caused so many problems in this state, caused so much harm. I'm from the Rio Grande Valley. It just was a few weeks ago when there was trailers outside of funeral homes full of bodies because they didn't have anywhere to keep them in the mortuaries, when they had lines of ambulances waiting in front of hospitals because there was no room in the hospitals. People were dying. Mothers and fathers and grandfathers were dying all over the Rio Grande Valley. And because they had no access to health care, because the state refuses to accept expanded Medicaid, they were getting into a situation where families were being infected with this disease every single day across the Rio Grande Valley. It's going to get worse now that he's lifted the mandates in the state of Texas. I just don't understand why he's doing this, and this is going to create all sorts of problems for our state.
I want to say that the CDC issues guidelines. They issue guidance to the states, and they sort of code states by where they are. Aaron Banco obtained, she tweeted out this image from internal FEMA briefings that Politico obtained, showing Texas and Mississippi, along with Oklahoma and New Hampshire, are considered red zone states, which means their positivity rate is higher than 10%. And Olivia, I don't know about you. You were actually working on the coronavirus task force in May of 2020 or April 2020 when this rush to reopen happened. I was covering it, but I have to pick my jaw up off the floor. Like, have we learned nothing? Does this feel familiar to you?
It absolutely does. I remember when Governor Abbott was one of the first people in line to start lessening restrictions across the state. And I knew what that would mean going forward. And I knew that it would lead to spikes in cases. And I knew that Texas hospitals and the frontline workers were going to suffer because of it. So you would think that Governor Abbott would have learned his lesson, but he doesn't care. I agree with Gilberto, he doesn't care. He doesn't care about the well-being of these Americans. And really, he's playing petty politics over human life. And this is from the school of Trumpism directly, right? This legacy of the number of deaths that we have and all of these problems are a legacy of an unfit individual who ended up in the Oval Office. And all of these Republican governors who are actually imposing these lifting of these restrictions and taking these actions for their own selfish endeavors are shameful. And people need to remember this moving forward, and they should be held accountable.
Gilberto, it has never been, except for that first 4 to 8 weeks, it's never been this sort of all or nothing proposition. Every state is in some form of sort of managed reopening, right? So, capacity limitations, some things can be open, some things can't. You have to wear a mask if you go to the barber. But what we have around this time is we do have the vaccine. Today, the president announced federal prioritization of teachers and educators, right? So the idea is we want to get schools open. We will target federal vaccinations at them. There are some states that are prioritizing workers who would be most exposed. Is that the case in Texas? I don't believe it is, but has he prioritized the kinds of workers, say a barback in a bar in South Padre Island, who's going to be working through spring break in a few weeks?
No, what he has prioritized in the distribution of this vaccine has been wealthy people and people that are part of the Republican elite of this whole state. That's who's getting it. If you look at the statistics on where this vaccine is going in the state, people that are part of the Republican elite of this whole state, that's who's getting it. If you look at the statistics on where this vaccine is going in the state, people that are part of the Republican elite of this whole state, that's who's getting it. If you look at the statistics on where this vaccine is going in the state, people that are part of the Republican elite of this whole state, that's who's getting it. Look at the statistics on where this vaccine is going in the people that are part of the Republican elite of this whole state, that's who's getting it. If you look at the statistics on where this vaccine is going in the state, dangerous thing, the most dangerous threat to the state of Texas is Greg Abbott.
All right, Alberto Enosa from the Texas Democratic Party, Olivia Troy, a proud Texas native. Thank you so much for making the time. FBI Director Chris Wray was on the Hill today testifying before the Senate about the January 6th attack. We're going to talk about that. And what do Ted Cruz and this guy in a hot dog suit have in common? I will explain coming up.
1,000 digital media tips. Some have even taken the painful step of turning in their friends or their family members. But with their help, we've identified hundreds of suspects and opened hundreds of investigations in all but one of our 56 field offices. And of those identified, we've arrested already more than 270 individuals to date, over 300 when you include the ones of our partners. Unfortunately, as you noted, Mr. Chairman, January 6th was not an isolated event. The problem of domestic terrorism has been metastasizing across the country for a long time now, and it's not going away anytime soon.
Wray did not deliver a lot of new information, but he did confirm several important truths about just who perpetrated the attack and why, undermining the lies delivered by ex-President Trump and his followers, including Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson.
Has there so far been any evidence that the January 6th riot here, the insurrection, was organized by people simply posing as supporters of President Trump?
We have not seen any evidence of that, certainly.
Is there any evidence at all that it was organized or planned or carried out by groups like Antifa or Black Lives Matter?
We have not seen any evidence to that effect thus far in the investigation.
And is there any doubt that the people who stormed the Capitol included white supremacists and other far-right extremist organizations?
There's no doubt that it included individuals that we would call militia violent extremists, and then in some instances, individuals that were racially motivated violent extremists who advocate for the superiority of the white race.
Despite Director Wray's testimony, there is, of course, still 2 months in, a lot we do not know about the attack, a lot we will continue to learn. as the investigations continue to play out. Rhode Island Senator Sheldon Whitehouse questioned Director Wray during today's hearing. He joins me now. Senator, what you learned today?
Well, we learned that the Antifa little lie that surrounds the big lie and the fake Trump protesters little lie that surrounds the big lie were complete bunk and just manufactured propaganda. And we learned, I think, that the FBI continues to take this, seriously as a potential upstream investigation. He was less clear than Merrick Garland about that they would follow the evidence wherever it leads, and particularly towards people who were not in the Capitol at the time. So we'll see where that goes. My concern at the beginning was that this was going to be an investigation that got dumped on the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, and that the method was going to be to just prosecute a lot of people from the raid itself, but not do the proper upstream investigation to see who was behind it. And I think we've headed that off with Attorney General Garland, and that's an important question, I think, to make sure that gets done.
What is your impression of Ray? Do you trust him? Do you think he's a straight shooter?
Follow me.
If so, that would be a new phenomenon, because I've spent 3 years trying to get him to answer questions, and he's hidden behind every conceivable dodge. And we have unanswered questions from 2017. The FBI came in for 9 hearings in the Trump era, and in 7 of those hearings, we got exactly 0 of our questions for the record answered. And when I say our, I mean Democrats and Republicans alike. So he participated in or ran a massive traffic jam that stopped answers to huge numbers of QFRs, almost all of our questions for the record, and to all of our letters. And then at the same time, he set up this side road where they could run thousands, 1,500 documents in 18 different document productions into the Republicans on the committee so they could do their Crossfire Hurricane investigation. So I still want an explanation of why our requests for documents and answers got jammed into the traffic jam, and Republican Trump-friendly questions and requests for production got given this special side road around the traffic jam at high speed and with considerable, it seems, considerable waiver of ordinary protective privileges and protections about investigative materials, classified materials, and so forth.
Do you have, were there specific inquiries? I know you had a back and forth with the director today about this. There's specific inquiries that you still feel like you're being stonewalled, and what does that say about your confidence in him to run this very, 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 what will be, in many ways, a very politically sensitive investigation?
Yeah, I think the first thing we need answers to is why were we stonewalled for all those years? What was the method? On whose instruction was that done? What was the scheme? What was the plan? Who was involved? Why did it happen? All of that. But that's kind of a processy question. The more important stuff is to look back through, say, the FBI investigation of Brett Kavanaugh and whether that was real or fake. And what happened with that so-called tip line that the FBI ran. Because as best as I can tell, these are some of the questions they refused to answer. As best as I can tell, all the information that came floating in through that tip line got dumped straight into the bin. None of it got reviewed pursuant to standard FBI procedures and protocols for reviewing the info that comes in through a tip line. It was more the tip dump than the tip line. And understanding if that happened, why that happened, who was involved, on whose direction, presumably from the White House. If this guy presided over a fake FBI investigation, we need to know that.
Final question for you is about your, if Merrick Garland should be confirmed, which looks like he will likely be, your confidence in the entirety of the Justice Department dealing with an investigation that is massive in scope. 270 arrests already, 300. There's probably hundreds more suspects yet to be identified.
Yes, and we still have unanswered questions. But this would be a lot of cases, and they're not used to doing the kind of cases at that level where you're working your way up to the kingpins and the funders and the organizers in the same way that they're doing a lot of street crime in the district. So TBD, I guess, is the best way to say it.
All right, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, I'm going to put you down as not yet convinced, Director Wray. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time tonight, sir. Coming up, Ted Cruz, the hot dog man, and the utter shamelessness of the Republican Party on full display.
Oh, I just moved three guys at once. Three guys at one time.
Chris, thank you, my friend. Much appreciated. And thanks to you at home for joining us this hour. Before we start in earnest tonight, I do just want to take a second, if you will indulge me, because I have a thank you that I need to say. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, I promise, but I just wanted to tell you that we've had a couple of real milestones here at the show, good ones. In January, for the first time ever, this show was the #1 most watched show on all of cable television, which is crazy, right? Not just the most watched show on cable news, but the most watched show in all of cable TV, everything. That was in January, which was flummoxing, and I thought absolutely was a fluke. But then today, we learned that we did it for a second month in a row. It turns out we were the most watched show on all of cable TV for both January and February, which I have no idea what to make of. But even better than that, for February, for this past month, not only were we the most watched show on cable, but our network, this network, MSNBC, was the most watched network in all of cable TV in the month of February, which is the first time that has ever been true for us as a network since we came into existence nearly 25 years ago. So if you know me, if you've ever seen the show, you know that I don't talk about ratings and cable news wars and all that stuff. And so I'm not going to dwell on this. I will not mention it again. But it is a really big deal for us. And I'm really thankful to you for watching this show. I had no idea there would ever be so many of you watching. It does blow my mind personally, but I am so grateful and humbled. Thank you for supporting the show. Thank you for supporting MSNBC. We will keep doing our best to be worthy of your time and your trust for you tuning in. So, all right, let us never speak of this again. Sorry, but I had to get that out. All right, moving on. Today, the nation's new Commerce Secretary was confirmed by the Senate, Gina Raimondo. She's the governor of Rhode Island, or she was the governor of Rhode Island. Now she'll be our Commerce Secretary. Yesterday, the new Education Secretary was confirmed as well, Miguel Cardona. The Senate also tonight just confirmed Cecilia Rouse to be chair of the Council of Economic Advisors. That was an overwhelming vote. It's 95-4 for Cecilia Rouse. The nomination of William Burns to be CIA director just got a unanimous vote out of the Intelligence Committee, and that will now head to the floor. A unanimous vote in committee is a good sign that he may get a unanimous vote on the floor. Deb Haaland to run the Interior Department, Javier Becerra to be Health Secretary. Those are cabinet confirmations. Both seem to be on track to happen soon as well. Now, before tonight, we were still waiting after days and days and days and days to see if a Republican senator would decide that he or she would support Neera Tanden to run the Office of Management and Budget in the White House. The reason the White House needed to look for a Republican to support Ms. Tanden is because conservative Democrat Joe Manchin of West Virginia announced that he wouldn't vote for her, which immediately it was evident as soon as he said that would potentially scupper her nomination. He said that he would not support her nomination because he decided that he did not like the combative tone of some of Neera Tanden's past tweets. And the reason this is sticking in everyone's craw, the reason this announcement that he wouldn't support Tanden has become sort of a stain on Senator Manchin's reputation, is not that senators don't have a choice as to which way they're going to vote on every nominee. It's the question of the standard that he's applying here. Because, of course, Senator Manchin voted to confirm plenty Trump nominees. All men, of course, who had much worse problems with their online tone than Neera Tanden ever got anywhere near. The reason this is a real problem for Senator Manchin and his reputation is because, for some reason, Senator Manchin was only bothered by her tone in her online statements. He was not similarly bothered by the much more inflammatory things said by Republican male nominees who he happily voted for in the past. Again, all senators have a choice to, they're consulted, right? The advise and consent is a real thing. They are supposed to make an individual decision on every nominee. The problem here is not Senator Manchin voting against a Democratic president's nominee. The problem is Senator Manchin applying a blatant and inexplicable double standard just for her. When guys who did much worse were no problem to him, but for some reason she really bugs him. So because of that, we've been waiting to see if Senator Manchin would explain that so that this wouldn't accrue to his reputation the way it's going to. In the absence of that, we've been waiting to see if a Republican would actually stand up to support her so she could get the 50 votes she needed to be confirmed to run the White House Budget Office. Lisa Murkowski, the Republican senator from Alaska, was thought of as a potential crossover vote for Neera Tanden. Tanden and Murkowski met in Murkowski's office on Capitol Hill yesterday. Senator Murkowski still had not said how she would vote on the Tanden nomination when it got to the floor. But tonight, all this waiting and wondering and, I think, consternation over the behavior of Senator Manchin came to an end. Well, maybe the consternation about Senator Manchin will continue. But the waiting about Neera Tanden came to an end when Tanden told the White House she wanted to withdraw her nomination.
If you look at the statistics,
now, the result of this, as made clear in a White House statement in response, is that Tanden will get another job in the Biden administration. They will put her in a job that does not require Senate confirmation. She will join the administration.
From the Texas Democratic Party.
And Senator Joe Manchin will drag this around as a stain on his reputation for the long run. But it also means that President Biden will need to pick a new nominee to run the White House Budget Office. So there is some uncertainty now in terms of how the Biden cabinet is going to look in the end, because the Tanden nomination, by his announcement today, made at the top. For all the pioneering
Senator
leadership
Cruz
of
of
people
Texas
like
is back in Washington, D.C. today.
Canadians
Maybe it's just me.
Justin Trudeau named to his
Every time I
first
see him
cabinet.
asking questions and hearings
The
about
infrastructure minister, the science minister, the minister for small business, Murkowski's office on Capitol Hill yesterday. Senator Murkowski still had not said how she would vote on the Tanden nomination when it got to the floor. But tonight, all this waiting and wondering and, I think, consternation over the behavior of Senator Manchin came to an end. Well, maybe the consternation about Senator Manchin will continue. But the waiting about Neera Tanden came to an end when Tanden told the White House she wanted to withdraw her nomination. Now, the result of this, as made clear in a White House statement in response, is that Tanden will get another job in the Biden administration. They will put her in a job that does not require Senate confirmation. She will join the administration. And Senator Joe Manchin will drag this around as a stain on his reputation for the long run. But it also means that President Biden will need to pick a new nominee to run the White House Budget Office. So there is some uncertainty now in terms of how the Biden cabinet is going to look in the end, because the Tanden nomination has come to an end. That said, Merrick Garland seems to be moving forward fairly smoothly to be the next Attorney General of the United States, although somewhat along the same lines. Perhaps it should also be noted that 2 women of color who have been named by President Biden to be other senior officials in the Justice Department working directly under Attorney General designate Merrick Garland, 2 women of color, Kristen Clark and Vanita Gupta, have attracted rabid attacks from Republicans at this point. And so we'll see what happens to their nominations as well, even as Merrick Garland seems to be moving forward. We'll also see if Joe Manchin decides he doesn't like them for some reason. At the Justice Department, we'll have more ahead this hour on the proverbial burning wreckage that all the Biden appointees are going to be walking into at the Justice Department, and the challenges ahead with the prosecutions related to the January 6th Capitol attack. There was an interesting and surprise announcement today made about who's going to be taking a key job in the Biden Justice Department that will have an important relationship not only to the January 6th arrests and prosecutions, but also to a bunch of the cases that ended up in a weird semi-legal limbo after what appears to have been improper political influence on Justice Department decisions under the Trump administration. A new appointee announced today for a key part of the Justice Department who's going to have that mess to clean up. We'll have more on that coming up later on this hour. The new defense secretary in the Biden administration, you'll remember he was confirmed very quickly after the inauguration, retired General Lloyd Austin. And it's interesting, for all of the diversity in our armed forces, including at the top, for all the pioneering leadership of people like Colin Powell, who served as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, of course, before he became Secretary of State. Before Lloyd Austin, it's almost impossible to believe, but the Defense Department never had an African-American Secretary of Defense before Mr. Austin took that role this year under President Biden. And you might remember a few years back in Canada, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau also made a groundbreaking, sort of glass ceiling breaking choice for defense minister in that country. He chose a man named Harjit Singh Sajjan to be Canada's Minister of National Defense. It's the equivalent position of what Lloyd Austin is here in our government. Minister Sajjan is a Sikh. He wears a turban as a visible sign of his faith. He's a combat veteran with multiple tours in Afghanistan, also a former police officer. He's also very photogenic and charismatic. And so he became a bit of an international media star when he was first named to the cabinet. But interestingly, Minister Sajjan, the Canadian Defense Minister, was actually one of 4 Sikh Canadians who Justin Trudeau named to his first cabinet. The Infrastructure Minister, the Science Minister, the Minister for Small Business and Tourism, and the Defense Minister. All 4 of those Canadian cabinet ministers of Sikh origin in Justin Trudeau's first cabinet. The Canadian population overall is about 1.5% Sikh. And as those numbers have grown, and Sikh families have prospered in Canada, and Sikhs have been elected to Parliament and started to become high-ranking government ministers, every now and again, we here in the States get sort of media crossover. We cross over into our media and our culture of something cool happening in Canada to sort of celebrate. Celebrate is the right word. To celebrate this particular relatively new kind of diversity among Canadians and new immigrants there. Like, for example, this job, and this is what that same guy just posted today. Here in the United States today, here is the Tennessee version of that for us. Dolly Parton in Tennessee today. Dolly got her shot. The Sikh Canadian was a bunch of big news, really big news. On COVID, there was some inexplicable news mixed into it from Texas and Mississippi, where today governors in those states announced they're dropping their mask requirements entirely in those states. Why now? Texas and Mississippi are both states where case numbers have very recently started to climb back up. Look at the far right side of each of those graphs. For all the progress each of those states has made and all the trauma and death they have been through, their numbers have just started to come back up. Case numbers in both states on the upswing, and vaccines now rolling out. Insufficient numbers and increasing numbers that can get us to the end of this thing if we can just hold on a few more weeks. And they're deciding they can't wait another second. They're pulling all COVID-related rules. Like I said, at least to some eyes, fairly inexplicable decisions today in Texas and Mississippi. And it's not like Texas and Mississippi don't have other things to be worrying about right now. Both those 2 states have thousands of residents without clean drinking water because of infrastructure failures right now, including in the capital city of Mississippi. Right? In both of those states, they've got huge present dangers right now, with thousands of residents without potable drinking water because the state has absolutely blown it. So those 2 Republican governors in those states have decided that this is the right moment for a big, distracting, disastrous public health decision. Anyway, knock yourself out. Meanwhile, though, today is the day we got really very big news about vaccine progress. Somehow, And we're going to try to find out how tonight. Somehow the administration persuaded two big rival drug companies, Merck and Johnson & Johnson, to stop competing on this front and instead cooperate, help each other out. Johnson & Johnson, as you know, has just developed this new vaccine that was only just approved this weekend, started shipping out yesterday. All the data say it works great. It only requires one shot. It only needs to be stored in a normal refrigerator without any special equipment. It is cheaper than the other two vaccines we've got approved. It's got sort of everything going for it, except for whatever reason, the Biden administration has been saying for a while now that they were surprised to learn when they took over 5 weeks ago that Johnson & Johnson didn't actually have the logistical capacity to manufacture that vaccine in large enough amounts. So we talked with the chief science advisor to the COVID-19 response, Dr. David Kessler, about that a couple of weeks ago. He said that he had been working on that problem that very day and that there was a whole of government effort to work on that problem, among others, in terms of these production bottlenecks. Well, today, the Biden administration announced that they worked out a deal where this competing company, Merck, will come in and help with the manufacturing of another company's of Johnson & Johnson's vaccine.
The Vice President and I have some good news to report. Today, we're announcing a major step forward. Two of the largest healthcare and pharmaceutical companies in the world that are usually competitors are working together on the vaccine. Johnson & Johnson and Merck will work together to expand the production of Johnson & Johnson's vaccine. This is the type of collaboration between companies we saw in World War II. We also invoked the Defense Production Act to equip two Merck facilities to the standards necessary to safely manufacture the J&J vaccine. Johnson & Johnson's vaccine manufacturing facilities will now begin to operate 24/7. Here's what all this means. We're now on track to have enough vaccine supply for every adult in America by the end of May. Let me say that again. And I'm pleased to announce today, as a consequence of the stepped-up process that I've ordered and just outlined, this country will have enough vaccine supply, I'll say it again, for every adult